Overlord Volume 1 Chapter 4. Duel. Part 1. The village chief had a house near the village square. Upon entering, one would be greeted by a large living room, with a kitchen off to one side. A rickety old table and several chairs occupied the center of the room. Ains surveyed the interior from where he was seated on one of the chairs. The sunlight which shone through the windows illuminated every corner of the room, so he could see clearly inside even without dark vision. He took a look at the woman in the corner of the kitchen, and the farming tools inside the house. There were no manufactured products to be seen anywhere. Just as Ains thought that there would not be much in the way of technology here, Ains realized that his thinking might be naive. Still, he was curious about what sort of science that a world with magic would develop. Ains shifted his hand across the old table to avoid the sunlight. His metal gauntlets were not heavy, but the shabbily made table shook under its weight. The chair also creaked from Ains sitting on it. This was a textbook definition of the word poverty. Ains leaned the staff on the table to keep it out of people's way. The way the staff reflected the sunlight in a brilliant display made the run-down old house appear to be some sort of fairy tale wonderland. He recalled the surprised expressions on the villagers' faces, the way their eyes went wide and how they were lost for words. A surge of pride came over Ains as the villagers asked about the staff which he and his guildmates had painstakingly crafted. However, his delight was immediately suppressed to normal levels, which made Ains furrow his non-existent brows. Frankly speaking, Ains disliked this forced calming effect. That said, it was also true that allowing his emotions to run wild would make it difficult to solve the challenges ahead of him. With that in mind, Ains prepared himself for his upcoming task. He had to negotiate payment for rescuing the village with the chief. Of course, Ains's real objective was to obtain information, and not money. However, directly asking for information would be strange. While it would be fine in a small village like this, once the local lords found out, they would begin making their way to him. When they discovered that he knew nothing about this world, there was a high chance that they would try to use him. Was he being too cautious about this? Ains felt that this was like running across a busy road. A fatal accident could happen at any time. The fatal accident in this case meant encountering the mighty beings of this world. Strength and weakness were two sides of the same coin. For now, Ains was stronger than everyone he had encountered in this village. However, that did not guarantee that he was stronger than everyone in this world. In addition, Ains was now undead, and from the terrified reaction of the two girls, he could imagine that undead were not very well received in this world. He had to be aware that since most humans would hate him, they might well attack him. Thus, he had to tread very carefully. Sorry to keep you waiting. The chief sat opposite Ains. His wife stood behind him. His skin was dark and covered in wrinkles. His body was very muscular, and it was obvious that those muscles had been honed through heavy labor. More than half of his hair was white. Though his crudely made cotton shirt was stained by dirt, it did not stink. The tired look on his face made Ains think he was over 45 years old, but it was hard to tell, because he seemed to have grown older in the past half hour or so. The chief's wife was roughly the same age as her husband. She had been slim and beautiful once, but after long years of working on the farm, that beauty was nowhere to be seen. All that was left were the wrinkles that covered her face. Her shoulder-length black hair was mussed up, and she looked gloomy even under the direct sunlight. "Please, help yourself." The village chief placed a crude-looking cup on the table. Albedo was not here because she was patrolling the village. Ains raised his hand, refusing the cup of hot, steaming water. He did not feel thirsty, nor could he remove the mask. However, he felt that he should have refused earlier, given that she had gone to so much trouble for him. The trouble in question concerned the boiled water. First, there was the matter of creating sparks with a flint. Then, she had to light wood shavings or tinder with those sparks. Then, she had to fan the sparks into flames, and when they were big enough, she had to transfer them to the stove. Then, she had to boil the water, and by the time that was finished, a long time had passed. This was the first time Ains had seen water boiled by a hand-started fire, rather than through the use of an electric kettle. He found it quite interesting. Back in his world, he had boiled water on a gas stove, so it was hardly as time-consuming as this. This was also a good opportunity to gather some information on the technological level of this world. With that in mind, Ains spoke to the chief again. "I do apologize, especially since you went to all this trouble to prepare water for me. You are too kind. There is no need to apologize." The fact that Ains lowered his head to them, however slightly, filled the village chief and his wife with dread. They could not imagine the Death Knight's summoner bowing his head to anyone. However, it was hardly strange to Ains. It was always a good idea to have a friendly attitude when negotiating with someone else. Of course, he could simply have used charm person to make them talk, followed by high-tier memory alteration spells, much like he had done with the sisters. However, that was a last resort, because it took far too much MP. Ains recalled the feeling of spending MP. It felt like a strange fatigue, like he had lost something. Just altering the tens of seconds of their memories until he had put on his mask and his gauntlets had taken a considerable amount of MP. Then, let us cut to the chase and begin the negotiations. Yes. But before that, thank you very much. The chief bowed to Ains, his head so low that it nearly touched the table. After that, his wife bowed as well. Without your help, we would all be dead by now. You have our deepest thanks. Ains was quite surprised to receive such unreserved gratitude. When he looked back on his past life, he had never been thanked like this before. No, the sisters he rescued earlier had acted that way too. Well, he had never saved someone else's life before, so it was only to be expected. That was a relic from his time as a human being as Suzuki Satoru. Although he was somewhat embarrassed by this earnest appreciation, he certainly did not dislike it. Please, raise your heads. Like I said earlier, I did not help you for free. We know that, but still, we wish to thank you for rescuing us and many of the other villagers. Then, paying me more will be good enough. Come, let us discuss it. You must have many things to do, village chief Dono. Nothing could be more important than spending time with our savior, but I understand. The chief slowly raised his head, and Ains racked his non-existent brains. His goal here was to obtain information through conversation, rather than through magic. What a pain! He still remembered the tricks he had used as an office worker. How effective would they be here? Hopefully, at least half of them would be useful. After steeling himself against the possibility of failure, Ains asked, "Let us get to the point. How much can you pay me? We would not dare deceive our savior. I do not know how many silver and copper pieces we can gather if we do not collect them from everyone, but I believe we can muster up at least 3,000 copper pieces." I have no idea what that means, Ains thought. Asking him directly was a mistake. I should have tried a different approach. Besides, I was a lousy worker to begin with, and my job skills were pretty bad. It sounded like a large amount, but without knowing the value of money, he could not tell if it was an appropriate sum or not. He had to avoid accepting too high or too low a sum, lest he reveal his ignorance. No, he should have been relieved that they did not offer him 4 heads of cattle, or something. Just as he was about to sink into depression, his mental state immediately settled down. Ains silently praised his undead body, and then he realized one more thing. First, copper and silver pieces were the basic units of currency in this village. Second, there should be other forms of currency which were more or less valuable, but he was not confident that he could draw this information out of them. He needed to learn the monetary value of these copper pieces. Without that knowledge, things would be troublesome in the future. However, not knowing the value of money was quite suspicious, and he wanted to keep a low profile while he learned more about this world. That was why he was thinking as hard as he could to avoid making a bigger mistake. These small coins are hard to carry in large amounts. I'd like something in a bigger denomination, if you can manage it. Our sincerest apologies. If we could pay in gold pieces, we would. However, the fact is that our village does not use gold pieces. Ains fought back the urge to sigh in relief. The chief's answer went in the direction that he was hoping for. Therefore, Monga thought heavily about how he would continue steering the conversation, until it seemed like smoke would start coming out of his head. How about this? I plan to buy the produce of this village for a reasonable price, so all you need to do is pay me in currency used for trading. Ains secretly opened his inventory under his robe, and withdrew a pair of gold coins from ch4. One of the coins was decorated by the face of a woman, while the other coin had the face of a man. The former was a coin from after the huge update, Valkyrie's downfall, while the latter was a coin from before the update. Their values were the same, but they meant different things to Ains. The old coin was one that had followed Ains ever since he had started playing ch4 until he had formed the guild Ainsulgaon. The new coins had been released with the update, when Ainsulgaon had been in its golden age. His equipment was almost complete at that point, so those coins simply went into his inventory's coffers. Ever since he had started out as a skeleton mage, he used his spells to defeat monsters roaming the world and gained gold coins which floated in the air. He soloed dungeons, defeated the vicious monsters within, and earned a huge pile of gold with great effort. After the members of Ainsulgaon completed a dungeon, they sold the data crystals they collected, and in exchange, they received these gold pieces, which glowed so brightly. But Ains waved that topic aside. He put the old coin away, and held up the new coin. If I use this gold piece to buy something, what could I get for it? He placed the gold coin on the table. As one, the village chief and his wife stared, their eyes wide. This is currency used in a land far, far away. Can it be used here? I should think so. Please wait a little. Relief came over Ains as he heard that the coin could be used. Then, he watched as the chief left his seat, went to his room, and came back with something he had once seen during his history lessons. That object was called a balance scale. After that, it was his wife's turn. She took the gold coin and put it next to a circular object, as though she were comparing their sizes. After she was satisfied, she placed the gold coin on one pan of the balance, and on the other pan went a counterweight. He seemed to recall that this sort of thing was called a standardized mass. As Ains went through his memories, he compared them to the wife's actions and tried to figure out what she was trying to do. The first part should have been comparing his coin to the gold pieces of this country, and next she was trying to confirm its gold content. It would seem the gold coin was heavier, and the standardized mass rose up. The chief's wife put another mass on it, and both sides balanced out. It seems to be about twice as heavy as a regular gold piece. Perhaps if we could scratch the surface. Oi, you're being rude. Please accept my sincerest apologies on behalf of my wife for saying such foolish things. No wonder. She must have thought it was gold-plated. Ains was not completely unoffended, but he was not angry. It's fine. Although, if you scratch it and find that it's pure gold, you'll take it, no? Ah, no. We are truly sorry for this. The chief's wife bowed in apology, and returned the gold coin. Think nothing of it. After all, it's only sensible to verify the bona fides of any money you're given. Still, what do you think of this gold piece? Don't you think it looks like a work of art? Indeed, it is very beautiful. May I ask the name of the country from which it came? It's no longer. Yes, that country no longer exists. I see. Well, you've confirmed for yourselves that it weighs twice as much as a regular gold piece, but considering its artistic value, this gold piece should be worth more as a result. What do you think? That may be so. But we are not merchants, and we do not know the value of art. Ha. Well, that's not wrong. So, if I were to use this to buy something, it would be worth 2 normal gold pieces. Of course. Actually, I have a few more gold pieces like this. What can you sell me for them? Of course, I wish to pay the usual market rate for them. I don't mind if it's the same as what a street vendor would charge. By all means, go ahead and inspect these coins. Please. Ains Ulgaun Sama. The village chief's sudden shout made Ains's non-existent heart lurch. The chief's determined expression seemed harder and more forceful than before. Ains will do. Ains Sama, then. The chief seemed a little surprised at this, but he soon nodded and continued speaking. I fully understand what you want to say, Ains Sama. For a moment, Ains wondered if a giant question mark icon had appeared over his head. There seemed to be a misunderstanding of some sort, but he had no idea what the chief was getting at, so he did not know how to answer him. I am very aware that you do not wish to be seen as cheap, and I understand that you would wish to request an appropriate reward in keeping with the public view of yourself, Ains Sama. Certainly, it would require a great deal of money to obtain your services. Therefore, what else do you desire besides 3,000 coppers? Ains had no idea what the chief was talking about, and his mind was a whirl of confusion. He was silently grateful that he was wearing a mask. The reason Ains brought out the gold coin was because he wanted to know what it could buy, and thus gain a rough grasp of market values. How had things ended up like this? The chief did not give Ains any opportunity to cut in and continued. However, as I said earlier, this village can only produce 3,000 copper coins in cash. Although you must be suspicious of this, we would not dare hide the truth from our savior, Ains Sama. The chief's expression seemed honest and determined. He did not seem to be lying. If it turned out to be a deception, then Ains could only curse his inability to read people. No, I am certain that a great man like yourself could not possibly be content with that sum. Perhaps if everyone in the village gathered their wealth, we might be able to produce sufficient cash to satisfy Ains Sama. However, our village has lost a lot of manpower, and if we paid more than 3,000 coppers, we would not be able to survive the coming winter. The same applies with our produce. Many fields will have to be abandoned because we lack the people to work them. If we gave you our supplies, our lives would be very difficult. Although it pains me to have to ask a favor of our savior, perhaps. Could we pay by installments? Isn't this a good chance? It felt like he had been lost in a dense forest, and then his field of view suddenly expanded before him. Ains pretended to think about it, and then all he could do was pray it all worked out. After a few seconds, Ains finally gave his reply. I understand. The payment will not be need. But why? The village chief and his wife stared at Ains, their eyes wide and their tongues tied. Ains raised his hand, indicating that he still had something to say. He had to consider what he could and could not reveal, and it was quite troublesome. He did not know if he could guide him into telling him what he wanted, but he had no choice but to try. I am a magic caster. I was researching spells in a place called Nazarick, and I have only stepped outside recently. I see, so that is why you are dressed like this. Ah, that's right, Ains muttered as he touched the jealous mask. What would people on the street think if they saw a magic caster walking around in his weird get-up? He thought of the crowded streets of Bali. And just as he was hoping not to see something like that in his world, Ains noticed something that he could not understand, which was how YGGDRASIL terms were understood and used here. The term, magic caster, referred to a lot of things. It included clerics, priests, druids, arcanas, sorcerers, wizards, bards, mikos, talismances, sages and countless other magic-using classes. In YGGDRASIL, they were all called magic casters. It would be surprising if the exact terminology carried over to this world. As Ains watched their reaction, he replied, I may have said that I did not want a reward, but a magic caster uses many tools to achieve his aims, including fear and knowledge. These things are all tools for generating profit, but like I said earlier, I was focused on spell research, so my knowledge of local matters is somewhat lacking. Therefore, I would like to learn about the surroundings from the two of you. In addition, I hope you will not tell anyone about this sale of information. I will accept that in lieu of a reward. Nobody would be so nice as to say, I don't want anything. Quote, one could say that nothing was more expensive than being free of charge. Someone who saved another's life was entitled to a reward for their hard work. Yet, if the savior said they did not want a reward, anyone would find that strange. Then, the next best thing was to make the other side feel that they had paid in some way, even if it was in an intangible form. In other words, the best solution to the present situation was to allay their suspicions by having them trade information to Ains. That would put them at ease. The chief and his wife nodded, steadfast looks on their faces. I understand. We will not let anyone know about this. Ains secretly clenched his fist in approval. It would seem the skills he had picked up through working could still be put to use here. Excellent. I do not wish to bind you with magic. I shall trust your good nature. Ains extended an armored hand. The chief stared blankly at it for a moment before taking the situation in, and he grasped Ains's hand. After that, Ains breathed a sigh of relief. It would seem shaking hands was a known practice here. It would have been tremendously depressing if the chief had looked dumbfoundedly at him. Of course, Ains did not fully trust them. After all, mouths that were sealed by the promise of benefits could be opened by bigger benefits. If he tried to play on their personalities to keep them quiet, the vagaries of human nature might make them talk. No method was better than the other, so all Ains could do was take a chance and hope that the chief's character would keep his lips sealed. Although, it would be fine even if he did talk. That betrayal would simply be more leverage Ains could use in future dealings with the village. That said, Ains's instincts told him that they would not betray him. After seeing the earnest gratitude of the chief and his wife, he believed that they would be loyal. Then, can you tell me more about this place? What is this? Is something the matter? No, it's fine. I was simply speaking to myself. Forgive me for alarming you. Ains recovered in an instant and immediately covered himself up. If his body was still human, he would be sweating buckets by now. The chief simply said, "Is that so?" and did not ask further. Perhaps the chief had already equated magic casters with weirdos. Quote, "Then again, that was better for Ains. Shall I prepare a drink for you?" "Oh, no, I'm not thirsty. Please, don't trouble yourself." His wife was no longer in the room, but outside there were many things she had to help with. Only Ains and the chief were in the house now. Ains first asked about the neighboring countries, and the chief responded with many names that he had never heard before. Although Ains was prepared for this, he could not help but be surprised after hearing them. At first, Ains had thought that this world would be designed according to the fundamental principles of YGGDRASIL. After all, he could use YGGDRASIL's magic here, and there were many connections with YGGDRASIL too. Yet, none of the names he heard were related to YGGDRASIL. The nearby countries were the Riesti's Kingdom, the Baharuth Empire, and the Slain Theocracy. These names did not appear in the context of YGGDRASIL, which was inspired by Norse mythology. Ains felt like the world was spinning and his body was wobbling. Ains gripped the table edge with a gauntleted hand to maintain his balance. Although he had expected this world to be an alien one, he could not help but be surprised by it. The impact was greater than he had expected. This was the first time he had felt so shaken ever since he had become undead. Ains tried his best to remain calm, and reconsidered what he had heard about those neighboring kingdoms and the local geography. Firstly, there was the Riesti's Kingdom and the Baharuth Empire. These countries were on different sides of a mountain range, and to the south of those mountains was a sprawling forest, and at the edge of that forest was this village, under the Riesti's Kingdom, and the fortress city of Rantel. Relations between the kingdom and the empire were bad, and they would fight a battle in the wilderness near Rantel almost every year. To the south was the Slain Theocracy. The best way to describe the orientation of these countries was to draw a circle, and then divide it up with an inverted T. It seemed confusing, but it was much easier to describe things that way. To the left was the Riesti's Kingdom, to the right was the Baharuth Empire, and below them was the Slain Theocracy. There were other countries, but the chief only knew of these three. The chief was not sure where exactly this village was placed between the three of them. In other words, how foolish of me. The knights from just now were wearing armor emblazoned with the insignia of the Baharuth Empire, so the chief believed that they were from the Baharuth Empire. But this area also bordered the Slain Theocracy, so they might have been knights from that country in disguise. Releasing them all was a mistake. He should have kept one for questioning, but it was too late for that now. If this was the work of the Slain Theocracy, then he should probably do something on the Empire's side. On the Kingdom's side, he should have accumulated enough goodwill with them for rescuing their village, so things should be fine for now. Ains sank into thought. Was he the only one who had come to this world? Impossible. There was a very high chance other players had come here too. Perhaps Hero-san was here as well. He needed to think about what would happen if he encountered other players. If other players had come to this world, they would probably gather up, given the nature of Japanese people. When the time came, he had to do almost anything to blend in. He could give in to anything as long as it did not involve Ains or Gaon. The problem was what would happen if the other side considered him an obstacle. The possibility was slight, but it could not be discounted. Ains Gaon was a guild that had always role-played as villains through Peking, and thus they were a much-hated guild. He could not be sure that he had shared that negative image. For all he knew, the other players might want to take revenge on him out of a sense of justice and righteous anger. In order to avoid others declaring a vendetta on him, he had to refrain from doing anything that antagonized the surrounding people. For instance, massacring the local populace, especially innocent civilians, might enrage those players who had not yet lost their humanity. Of course, it would be a different matter if there was a reason which would satisfy them, such as killing the knights who were trying to sack this village. In any event, it would be better if future actions were taken for a high-sounding reason. That also meant he might have to do things he did not like, but that could not be helped. If the people he met bore hatred toward Ainzulgaon, then combat would be unavoidable. To that end, he had to draw up a plan and countermeasures if that situation took place. Given the current strength of the great underground tomb of Nazarik's defenses, they could easily overwhelm about 30 level 100 players. In addition, they could use world-class items in their defense, so it was a nigh impregnable fortress. They would probably be able to repel invaders like they had in the past. However, it was easy to see how dire the situation could be without reinforcements. In addition, the trump card of Ainzulgaon, their world-class items would drain Ainz's levels every time he unleashed their full power. If they were attacked in succession, the time might come when the world-class items would become unusable. Ainz was very clear that wargaming a scenario like this in his head was prone to bias and tunnel vision. However, Ainz was no longer a child, and he always considered the worst-case scenario before taking any action. This was simply thinking of how to take care of a problem before it happened. If he just wanted to scrape by, he could simply live in the mountains like a beast. However, the power he possessed and the mighty name he bore prevented him from doing that. If he wanted to coexist peacefully with the world, then he would need to deal with problems as and when they came up. As such, combat and the expansion of fighting power would become a very important topic in future. He had to gather information about this world, as well as news about other players. That should do. What happened? No, it's nothing. I simply spaced out because things were not as I expected. Right, can you tell me about something else now? Yes, I understand. The village chief started talking about monsters next. Much like YGGDRASIL, this world had monsters in it. The nearby forest was filled with monsters, and one of them was known as the Wise King of the Forest. Quote, there were also dwarves, all sorts of elves, goblins, orcs, ogres, and the like. Apparently some of the demi-humans had even built their own nation. There were people called adventurers who drove off these monsters, and they counted many magic casters among their number. Apparently, these adventurers had guilds of their own in all the big cities. Apart from that, he also learned about the nearby fortress city of Erantal. According to the chief, Erantal was the biggest city in the area, although he did not know exactly how large its population was. That seemed to be the best place to gather information. While the chief's words were helpful, there were still many unclear details. Therefore, it would be better to send someone over there to find out, rather than ask the chief questions. Finally, there was the matter of language. It was truly surprising that they understood Japanese in this new world. As a result, Ainz looked carefully at the village chief's mouth, and discovered that he was not, in fact, speaking Japanese. Neither their words or the movements of their mouths matched up with the Japanese language. After that, he did some more experiments. His conclusion was that someone had fed the people of this world some sort of translation konyaku. However, he did not know who had fed that substance to them. The language of this world was translated before the other party heard it. If he could understand what the other person said, then he should be able to communicate with non-human life forms, like say, a dog or a cat. The question now was who had done this. In addition, the village chief did not find this strange. It seemed perfectly natural to him. In other words, this was a basic principle of the world. Then again, when one thought about it calmly, this was a magical world, which might run on completely different precepts than the world in which Ains had been born. It would seem that the basic knowledge and facts he had learned in his previous life were no longer applicable here. This was a grave problem. If he was ignorant about this world, there was a chance he might make a fatal mistake. Ignorance was synonymous with disaster in this case. Right now, Ains lacked information about his surroundings. He had to solve this problem quickly, but he had no idea where to begin. Could it be that he had to kidnap someone and make him talk about what he knew? That was not a very workable option. That being the case, there was only one alternative left to him. It would seem I will need to live in a city for a while. He had to observe and imitate many things in order to learn about the world. He also need to understand the magic of this world, and many other things about it. As he thought about this, he heard footsteps from outside the flimsy wooden door. There was a large delay between the sounds of the footsteps, which meant that whoever it was, they were not advancing quickly. Those were the steady, plodding sounds of a grown man's footsteps. A knocking came from the door just as Ains turned to it. The chief could not help but look at Ains's face. He dared not act of his own accord because he was still explaining things to his savior, as payment for saving him and everyone else in the village. Please, by all means. I was intending to take a break myself. I won't mind if you step outside. I'm very sorry about this, the chief said as he nodded in apology. He headed to the door, and when he opened it, a villager appeared. He looked first to the chief, then to Ains, and said, "Chief, I'm sorry to interrupt you when you're talking to our guests, but they're ready for the burial." Oh. The chief looked to Ains, his eyes begging for his approval. "It's fine. There's no need to worry about me. Thank you. Then, tell the others that I will be there soon."